Yep.
Yes. So please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alice. So I'm going to go over how we implemented CodeMeta support for CoMSES.NET. The short answer was very carefully, or probably to be more accurate, lazily. CoMSES has been maintaining a computational model library for over a decade now. That's been part of our mission to improve practices around modeling and simulation of social ecological systems. We became aware of CodeMeta around 2017 as we were looking for some standardized ways to describe software dependencies, something like a data model common to pip or Maven or NPM, etc. So like the good lazy developers that we are, we made an issue about supporting it and then promptly ignored it for well over a year. Thanks to the workshop hosted by Alice et al. In November 2019, and with some much needed clarification from workshop participants there, like Daniel and Stephen, they helped to clear up my many confusions regarding CodeMeta. And we were able to come up with this metadata crosswalk from our system's metadata to CodeMeta properties. So this is the first, the first critical step. Once you have this, then you can build up a Python, like sort of an object model that serves as a translation layer or adapter. So we keep track of, in our system, we keep track of code bases and code base releases. These are roughly analogous to, I think, the Software Citation Working Group's notion of concepts and versions. I think that's the terminology they use, but I could be wrong about that. But essentially, a code base is the idea of the software, and it has metadata that's relevant, common to all versions, and things specific to a version go into a code base release. So we have these entities, and for those of you who would know Django, they're just Django models, and we have this simple adapter class that's based on our metadata crosswalk that transforms a specific version of this Django model into a CodeMeta object that we can then disseminate in our model downloads. So when we accept models from authors or submitters, we try to capture all the context needed to comprehend and reuse the computational model later on. So this includes things like narrative documentation, input data dependencies, output files, etc., as well as that constellation of metadata around who contributed to it, what open source license is being released under, and so on. So that's our submission information package. And then we bundle all of that up and curate it into an archival information package, which is a zip file that contains then this CodeMeta.json file, a generated file that's based on all the metadata that's submitted by the model authors or the submitter. So all the source code is in the code folder here. All the docs are in the docs. If there was data, there'd be a data folder here, etc. So another thing that's easy to do once you have an object model is to embed your CodeMeta in your web pages as structured JSON LD data. So for those of you who, just as a quick introduction, structured data is just a standardized way to describe your web page. And typically uses the schema.org vocabulary. It's perfect for CodeMeta since CodeMeta is just a specialization of schema.org, and I'm pretty sure there's plans to fold it into schema.org eventually. JSON LD is a way to specify linked data in the JSON format, which is super convenient for the web. So Google and other search engines will sometimes do cool things with embedded JSON LD. Perhaps at their diabolical whim. So you can view rich results like this recipe for apple pie. So again, it's quite straightforward to disseminate our CodeMeta objects that correspond to our code base releases on these landing pages. This is the page that gets resolved. If we mint a DOI, this is the permanent URL that it resolves to. And you can see all the JSON LD is inside the script tag, application LD plus JSON. There's a pile of JSON inside of it. This is using the Google structured data testing tool, which is very useful for validating and checking your structured data. let's see. Oh, well, that's about it for from my end. I also would like to plug the Open Modeling Foundation, where this is an emerging group of people interested in developing standards for simulation modeling across the Earth and geosciences and social sciences. And this, open software and the protocols around open software and describing it is very much part of the accessibility standards we're trying to craft. Some of the open questions that we probably still have around CodeMeta are whether or not we're generating correct CodeMeta. Are there additional fields we should be using? Are there fields that we're misusing or abusing? So some kind of CodeMeta specific validation with opinionated suggestions would be great. We also would like to integrate better with other open science initiatives. Here you can see we're using DOIs. When we have ORCIDs, we reference ORCIDs, but we probably also need to integrate with the ROR. I forget what the acronym stands for, but I think it's like Research Organization Registry, something along those lines. They're also establishing a set of IDs for research organizations. So the hardest part about all of this was just figuring out where things go and how to nest them. The schema.org site has very, very good information about software source code and software applications, but sometimes the relationships between them are a little fuzzy. So yeah, with that, I open that up to questions.
Thank you, Alan.
I do have a question if no one else have one. Alan, so it's great that you're using all these existing tools. So I wanted to ask, did you find like that there was not like did you find any fields missing from any of the descriptions that you wanted to have are not there yet? Because, for example, Google's the structure tool that you're showing is very good, but it usually complains when it's not schema.org purely compliant, right?
Yeah, that's right. So initially, and I'm not a schema.org expert and linked data expert as well. So I just follow whatever it tells me. So yeah, that's a great question. We so far we've been able to embed everything we think we want, but like I said, that something where if we had a set of ideal code meta that we could compare to, a set of these like exemplars that capture all of the provenance and the metadata needed to fully describe this software source code, that would be something useful to compare against. I'm not sure if that addressed your question exactly, but so we didn't really run into like, oh, I wish this field was here. We don't have a good place to put it. In some places we're being redundant. I just don't know what, there's not really much guidance as to what we should be targeting. And that part, there are examples from CodeMeta, but they're usually fairly small and they don't always cover all of the pieces. So it'd be nice to have some sort of an ensemble of CodeMeta exemplars.
Right. I think also in CodeMeta now you have a validator that I think it's not perfect, but it works quite well, at least when I was using it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great. I'll have to search for that again.
I also wanted to ask you, because I think on your mapping spreadsheet that you presented earlier, you mentioned it, yeah, in the title there at least, well, and you have it in a column. It seems that you were also planning to map with the citation file format maybe, and you decided to go, oh, you did the mapping there, but did you decide to go for CodeMeta instead, as it's a
yeah, so we would be able to map it to citation file format at some point. We just don't have we haven't devoted any time and energy into that yet. We were initially thinking that CodeMeta would be the sort of the standard and then citation file format. Eventually we'll have there'll be some way to automatically translate from CodeMeta to CFF. And so I'm waiting for Stephen to finish that.
Right. I think there is some tooling for that. And if I'm, is this looks like the spreadsheet that was from the workshop. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can see
Okay, so that's why it has that name. I set up all these spreadsheets and I wasn't paying a huge amount of attention to the name, except to make sure that each repository or resource had one. So that was the only thing I was doing. And what we were trying to do with that, and we still have these spreadsheets and we still have one for all the resources that were there, and I can easily set up another, but it was, this is what the property is. This is what CFF calls it. This is what CodeMeta calls it. This is what it is in your own, it was a crosswalk table for those. And then the intent was to then eventually provide these to the CodeMeta project so they could add those, but also, to allow people to map and see that it's not easy. It's not always easy to do that. Okay, so are there any other questions?
I have one more. So because these standards, well, especially CodeMeta, for example, is evolving and there will be new additions and stuff. Do you think you have a good workflow to include new versions, or that would be too painful, or what's your view on that?
That should be fairly straightforward. We would just be replacing our translation layer essentially, and then we could regenerate them all. So yeah, I think we've built it in a way that would make it easy to transition. I did just think of something related to Daniel's original question. One thing that would be nice to express is this notion of dependencies and sort of like linkages between source code, and I don't have a good solution. I haven't seen a good solution for this, but I don't really want to work on it. I want to wait for someone else to do it for me. So we that would be something very nice to have eventually. And I'm not sure who's going to where that's going to come from, but when it does, that would be great.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.